Hello, friends. Welcome back to 1D10T Does Stuff, and I'm the 1D10T in charge, Trevor Stewart 1308. And today we will be reading more from Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. Content warning. Oh, I forgot to put a content warning in here. Content warning, we will be dealing with some stuff, some emotional stuff. Let me switch that over on the Twitch stream so that nobody stumbles in without warning. Difficult topics. There we go. Yeah, we will be discussing some pretty heavy topics today, including racism, fat phobia, and various things like that. Before we dive into that, though, today's pre-rolls brought to you by the Hidden Leaf, downtown Charlottesville, 105 West Main Street, on the downtown mall, above the bricks, Suite 200. A great place to go with some great buds to get some great buds, eh, bud? And the only thing better than their bud is their customer service. And oh, hi, Just Me Crystal. Much love, much love. The only thing better than their bud is their customer service, and they have the lowest prices in town, according to my own personally highly biased research, by which I mean I was incredibly high when I did my personally biased research. Don't forget to check the website for times and events such as Frosty Fridays, where you can find our other two sponsors. Firehouse, where there's smoke, there's Firehouse, and Kush Gang, purveyor of fine edibles and drinkables. The website is thehiddenleafcville.com. That's thehiddenleafcville, all one word.com. A note of disclaimer, I will be discussing some difficult topics today. And I will be expressing some opinions. Those opinions belong to me, the channel, or the parent network, but do not necessarily belong to any of our sponsors, including Hidden Leaf, Firehouse, and Kush Gang. All right, we got that out of the way. Happy Tuesday, Just Me Crystal. All right. Well, so Fearing the Black Body, we started last week. We read the introduction. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you. All is relatively well today. Yeah, it's pretty good. A little tired, moving a little slow, but other than that, all is going well today. So, we started Fearing the Black Body last week. We read the introduction. Thank you. And we are going to go into chapter 1 today. The book is pretty self-explanatory. There's a lot of history of where, the current health and beauty standards come from, and how those health and beauty standards don't necessarily represent our current societal makeup. They don't really represent any societal makeup when it comes to it. They were developed based on a very select few people, and then extrapolated to cover the rest of the population. So yeah, it will be a lot of what this book is doing is also linking racism and fat phobia. There's a lot that's going on in this book. And I guess really the best way to express what I mean is for us to just start reading. let's dive in. Let's oops, wrong button. Hey, there we go. Let's dive in. Now, we did finish the introduction, the original epidemic, last week. So we're going to move on to Chapter 1, The Beauty of the Robust. Part 1, or Chapter 1 of Part 1. Being Venus. I have seen some amongst them whose whole bodies have been so well built and handsome that I never beheld finer figures, nor can I conceive how they might be bettered. So excellent were their arms and all their limbs. Albrecht Dürer on the African Physique, 1528. Her name was Katharina. In her portrait, drawn in 1521, she wears a simple headdress with a single jewel in the center. Her youth is skillfully captured the roundness and fullness of her cheeks. Her plump body is covered by an unadorned V-neck shirt and a modest high-collared frock. The entire effect is one of demure and unassuming beauty. Katharina's eyes are downcast, giving the 20-year-old an air of solemnity and gravity that might have seemed out of place were she not a slave. Katharina lived in Antwerp, Belgium. She was one of two slaves owned by Joa Brandoa. Ow. I got nothing on that name. I have no idea how to pronounce that. It looks like Joa Brando. The trade representative to the King of Portugal, Albrecht Dürer, the renowned Renaissance artist, happened to be passing through Antwerp in 1521, creating sketches and woodcuts that he sold around the city. On a brief visit with the Brando family, he encountered Katharina and was sufficiently moved by her comeliness to immortalize her in silver point. I sort of apologize to the Brandoa family, family, for mispronouncing their name, but also they were slave owners. I don't feel that bad. The artist's decision to draw the young African woman may have seemed inconsequential at the time. Hers was one of many sketches of Africans that Dürer completed during his lifetime. Nevertheless, his depiction of Katharina was a momentous event. Portrait of an African woman, Katharina, became the first known portrait of a black person in Antwerp. And it was produced at a time in Dürer's illustrious career during which, after years of studying the human form, he had come to the conclusion that what made something beautiful could never be fully comprehended or definitively laid out. For reasons he could not describe, Katharina too was a beauty. I am of the opinion that it really is almost impossible for us to capture the quintessence of beauty with language. It's almost impossible for us to capture the why is something beautiful with language. And I think we, as humans, feel the need to define things and quantify and qualify things so completely that we have a hard time dealing with something that we're incapable of putting words to. That being said, I don't think that in and of itself holds true for the racial and social discontinuities that we hold having to do with beauty. We have, as a society on the whole, trained ourselves to have certain ideas about what is and isn't beautiful through tradition and social conditioning. You know, beauty is such a personal idea. Everybody has their own concept of what's beautiful. That to define beauty in actual terms instead of relative terms is very difficult. I do think that without the social conditioning at hand, our ideas of beauty would be much more inclusive, would be much more broad. Whereas because of societal expectations and limitations and all of that noise, our idea of beauty is very much influenced by what society defines as beautiful. So yeah, I felt the need to address the subjectivity of beauty, of the idea of beauty here. Yeah. A great deal has been written about the aesthetic standards for women that prevailed during the Renaissance. While much of this literature shows that larger, fleshier physiques were prized, it also shows that what was considered attractive was not just about the size of the body, but also its shape. Proportionate and well-rounded physiques were revered, as they were believed to reveal something of the beauty and mystery of divinity. A woman might find herself being considered too thin or too fat, given the prevailing preference for proportionate, often implying medium, physiques. But if a lady had to err on the side of the scale, a fat woman was generally preferred to one who might be derisively labeled lean or bony. Comparatively fewer works, however, have explored how the growing population of black women who came to Europe as part of the slave trade affected representations of female beauty during the High Renaissance, late 15th to mid-16th centuries. This is not a minor oversight. The most famous artistic expression of female beauty during this period derived from the northern and western Italy and Low Countries. The major cities in these regions simultaneously served as key ports of the expanding slave trade. Consequently, black women often appeared in the in meditations on beauty by the era's most important artists. I think it's entirely possible that my stutter is somewhat based in dyslexia. The burgeoning population of African women as slaves and domestic servants in northern and western Europe between 1490 and 1590 frequently led to the incorporation of black women into the lexicon of what was defined as perfect female beauty. The inclusion of black women as beautiful in both high art and aesthetic discourse was neither simple nor without problems. African women were described as well-proportioned and plump, consequently viewed as physically appealing. Yet the burgeoning discourse about Africans suggested that their purported distinctive facial features made them facially unattractive. Black women were further denigrated due to their servile status. Therefore, despite black women's reputation as well-formed beauties, their purported African physiognomy and status as slaves became the early basis of social distinctions between low-status African women and their high-status European counterparts. What follows is a discussion of notions of perfect female beauty in three of the most trafficked centers of artistic integrity. Artistic ingenuity. Western Italy, Northern Italy, and the Low Countries. In all three, the correct model of female beauty was a central topic of conversation. Well-apportioned female figures were venerated through these areas. However, in two locations, Antwerp, Belgium, and Venice, Italy, Antwerp and Venice, the mushrooming population of black women led to their inclusion as beauties of low status and questionable facial allure. But having the right proportions and just enough embonpoint to titillate European sensibilities. Embonpoint. I wonder what that means. Yeah. Yeah. It is, I mean, in some ways, yes. What the author is doing here is trying to give us some idea of what the pervasive thought process was at the time. Hi, Maddie. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Embonpoint. It sounds French in basis, which if I were to pull the word apart and figure out what each part meant, it looks like in good something. If it's French, I would go with in good looks. It probably roughly translates to prettiness. But we can look it up real quick. The plump or fleshy part of a person's body, in particular a woman's bosom. So it probably literally translates to the good spot. Which now makes it feel like kind of an icky word. Embonpoint. Embonpoint. Yeah, that just has a... There's an ick factor to that one that I wasn't expecting. Yeah. Gross, gross, gross. I feel like it is less gross if oh, I was. I feel like it's less gross if a woman says it than a man. I feel like it's more gross when I say it. I don't think it felt so weird for her to write that. They're already fetishizing African women. By the 1590s, yes, they were. 1590s to 1690s? What Sabrina Strings here is describing is, yeah. Oh, this was 1521. This was around the 1520s. So, yeah. And again, this is not... I don't think that this is how Sabrina Strings really feels. I think this is Sabrina Strings trying to capture what the European mindset was. Because as we get into this book, it becomes very obvious that this is not... Oh, yeah, the people being described, yeah. And what they're saying, oh, yeah. Yeah. They're already starting to fetishize black people, black women. And they're starting to do it with... They're starting to only fetishize parts of black women. Sabrina just went off on a thing about how their faces weren't considered pretty, but their bodies were. So, yeah, it's... Yeah. And throughout this, it becomes apparent that Sabrina Strings is really trying to point out how gross this all is. They're dehumanizing them wholly already. Yeah, by this point, they've come to the notion that they have to dehumanize them in order to continue to enslave them. It does. It's not quite there yet. It doesn't. We're not quite mixed up with the science and the aesthetics in art, but we're, this is sort of the opening for that. The dehumanization had to happen pretty early on in the Atlantic slave trade in order to keep doing it. Yes, that is definitely where it's heading. That is definitely where it's heading. Yeah, it is. It's not until the Calvinists that we begin to discover exactly how dehumanizing it was gonna start getting. That's what you meant about victim blaming. Okay, yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, and it really does, there's... The amount of mental gymnastics that these people have to do, end up having to do, to justify slavery, to justify their fetishizations, it's pretty incredible. It's pretty crazy, and it's as we get further and further in, and we begin to see that, it becomes very it becomes very upsetting, but we know where it leads, and it's very upsetting. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for here. The pattern, once the pattern becomes obvious, it's very difficult to unsee. And it's very difficult to have any... It really starts to pull the rug out from under our medical institutions. What we think of as medical science, this really starts to pull the rug out from under the objectivity there. The perceived objectivity. And it really makes you wonder... It really makes you surprised that medicine works for anyone who isn't a white man of average size. Like, it really becomes obvious that this system was designed for a very specific group of people, and those people are not black people. They are not women. I better keep going or else we'll never get anywhere. Katharina was known by Durer simply as the Mooress. His journal tells us almost nothing about what motivated him to sketch the young African woman, nor do we learn about the duration or substance of their encounter. What we do learn from the journal is that Durer regarded himself as an artist and philosopher of the human form. As such, he took an exceptional interest in the growing numbers of Africans arriving in Northern Europe as part of the slave trade. By the mid-15th century, African slaves were being shuttled to European ports by the hundreds. The Portuguese, who in the 1440s became the first European nation to enter the African slave trade, maintained a dominant position until 1492, when Columbus made contact with the Americas. Although Spanish and Flemish traders mounted a challenge to the Portuguese slave trading monopoly between the 1450s and 1470s, by the end of the century, most of the Africans making their way into Europe did so in the holds of vessels manned by Portuguese traders. The Portuguese were thus largely responsible for introducing African slaves into Northern Europe, and some of the earliest Africans to be seen in the Low Countries arrived as slaves to Portuguese merchants. This appeared to be the case with Katharina and her owner, Joa Brandoa. I am so saying that wrong still. And her owner, JB. Antwerp, where they were settled, had been a key trading hub in the 15th century. By the 16th century, the city became the center of a new global economy of luxury goods. Slaves themselves were important from Slaves themselves were an important form of a luxury commodity in the new economy and were common among wealthy merchants. Durer's interest in Katharina within this social milieu was galvanized by his long-professed desire to understand the contours of human beauty. By the time he visited Antwerp in the early 16th century, Dürer had abandoned the idea of locating a singular ideal, concluding that beauty was found in the difference between various peoples of the world. I like that idea. Beauty is found in the various differences of people. I like that. I'm sure Durer is going to say something that makes me dislike him, but that idea in and of itself is nice, I think. I'm sure it can be twisted into something awful, though, if tried. This conception of beauty and difference was inspired in part by the gospel. Durer's reading of the scripture, in Durer's reading of the scripture, God had made all of mankind equal, and yet the Creator produced a tremendous amount of human biodiversity. The task of the portraitist, Durer believed, was to identify the big differences between the various nations of mankind. Doing this would help the artist grasp the beauty of humanity in all its fullness and richness. According to Durer, the Creator fashioned men once and for all as they must be. And I hold that the perfection of form and beauty is contained in the sum of all men. I mean, it's a cute idea. I like it. But I also do, know that we have evolved into the shapes we're in. And I know that evolution is an imperfect system. Evolution is a system of good enough. We are far from perfect. We are good enough to survive. I don't know. I find beauty in that to some degree, being good enough to survive. And just a process. Evolution is amoral and just a process. Exactly. I also don't believe that there is morality in beauty. So. But I do believe that beauty and form and function are connected. So, as we have stumbled into the form we are in, which is good enough to survive, pardon me, there is a beauty in that. I also believe that our concept of beauty is a neurochemical reaction, much like love. It's a hormone cascade in our brains and bodies. That's part of why I don't think there is any way of really getting to the basis of any one individual's definition of beauty, other than academically. We don't know what's going to set off that hormone cascade. We know some things that reliably set it off, but we don't know what specifically. So our ideas of beauty, the idea of beauty in my mind, the personal idea of beauty, is also a process of discovery. And I would also say amoral, because what we find beautiful doesn't necessarily connect to any morality. As we grow into ourselves as people and begin to understand ourselves, morality may work its way into our beauty standards. you might find something that is immoral, repugnant, and therefore its appearance may cause a negative hormone cascade. But I think that's a learned thing. I know that not all ideas of beauty are learned. I know that we see some things of beauty and it's just beautiful. It just evokes a response no matter what. I don't know that it's the same for every person. I know that I wasn't trained to like sunsets. I just do. I wasn't trained to like sunrise over the ocean. I just do. So, I do think that there is some inherent ideas around beauty for each individual, although it is not, I don't think, universal. None of that has anything to do with the racial implications of European youth and health and beauty standards. I just wanted to talk about what I thought the basis of our ideas of beauty really are. Because it's about to get, the ideas of beauty are about to get really mixed up in ideas around health and race and social status and all of these things. I do feel like there is an idea of beauty that is outside of all of that. Although, again, it's a very subjective idea of beauty. What each person's going to find beautiful is going to be different. Here's one for you. Industrial sites. There are a lot of spots around here that are just these sort of, on the side of the road, they're these sort of big industrial things. Some of them are silos for moving, various forms of, I was going to say grain, but it's not just grain, it's all kinds of stuff. Or I think there's some sort of salt mine outside of one of the cities around here. Oh, the salt mine outside of Buffalo, New York. Oh, I loved that. I love these massive, ugly industrial installations. They are, if I were looking at them with somebody else's eyes, they would be hideous. They would be awful. But to my eyes, they are beautiful. They are, I don't even know why. I don't know what that beauty is to me. I don't know, but it is something that I find beautiful and I enjoy looking at. I can very easily see how other people would not want to look at that. Don't like it. So yeah, that's, I felt like we needed to touch on beauty separately and the subjectivity of beauty and ideas around beauty separately before we get into what beauty is going to get tied up in. Sorry, I wasn't looking carefully at what I was doing, and I saw my fingers down here in the camera, and it caught my attention. It's like, what? Oh, that's me. I don't have ADHD. Ooh, shiny squirrel. Durr's interest in Katharina within this social milieu was galvanized by his long-professed desire to understand the contours of human beauty. By the time he visited Antwerp in the early 16th century, Dürer had abandoned the idea of... Oh, I went through all of that. I hold the perfection of form and beauty is contained in the sum of all men. I mean, to touch on that statement for a moment, I do believe that we are attractive to ourselves. The human form is attractive to humans. I don't believe that there is an ideal human form that will be attractive to all humans. Although Pedro Pascal ain't far off. Jason Momoa is also pretty close. Jason Momoa. But I do think that one of the things that we find beautiful is recognition of ourselves in something. When we look at someone and we can see aspects of ourselves in them, I think we are attracted to that. I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. I think it leads us to this very sort of, in extreme cases, xenophobic sense of attraction and beauty. But that's just my opinion. These sentiments were articulated about the time that Dürer wrote what was titled An Aesthetic Excursus, detailing the major difference between Africans and Europeans. This document, written sometime between 1512 and 1515, was eventually tacked onto the end of the third book of his 4 books on human proportion. Published posthumously in 1528. At the time, the artist claimed that the major difference between blacks and whites was to be found in the features and attractiveness of the face. Thus thou findest 2 families of mankind, white and black, and a difference between them is to be marked. I'm not saying that word. Black faces are seldom beautiful because of their very flat noses and thick lips. This tract was written before Dürer's encounter with Katharina in Antwerp. It is likely that the artist relied on stereotypical accounts of African physiognomy that were in circulation during the 16th and 17th centuries. These accounts served to underscore the Africans' inferior social position as the slave trade expanded. Indeed, there is a reason to believe that Dürer's disdain for African features in the aesthetic exercise. Oh, I bet it means exercise of appearances. Was at least partly motivated by the general tone of European high art and philosophy at the time. In another of his sketches, Berlin's study sheet, he made during the same period, Dürer drafted a row of humanity that shows prototypical faces of the various nations of mankind. The artist placed his version of the ideal or normative European face at the forefront of humanity. The final African visage, with its exaggerated features, which some scholars argue represented a cross between a black person and an ape, looked back warily at the rest of humanity. Historians suggest that Durer was likely inspired by Leonardo's and the other artists' haunting renderings of grotesque wild men. I've never been that word has never been easy for me to say. It's not the full-on N-word, but I did used to be able to, when reading it or quoting, I was able to sort of say the word even though it didn't feel right. I'm to a point where I just don't even want to say that word. It's been the imbuement of it with negative connotations has, well, it's always been there in my mind. It has recently become, in the last decade, just become hard for me to stomach as a word. Even that, it's I feel like it's the easy way out. It's the way that white people get to say the N-word without fully saying the N-word. And it's this sort of, and I don't think she's doing it. I think she's, just writing as a writer. It just doesn't want to come out of my mouth anymore. Like, I just don't want to say that word anymore. It just has an ick to it. So that has it was one thing when I was reading it quietly to myself, and I don't think I said it when I was reading either of the last two books, but I'd be really surprised if it wasn't there. So it just is just a note that I wanted to touch on there. After his visit to Antwerp, however, Durer appeared to revise his position. In his portrait of Katharina, his sketch of Rodrigo, a black man, and another of J.B.'s slaves, the artist portrayed the models' faces with dignity and solemnity. They also held a type of beauty that the artist suggested he couldn't quite specify. If Durer wavered on the question of the black face, he was resolute when it came to the beauty of the black body. Like many artists, Durer believed that God had bestowed upon Africans a bevy of physical blessings. The limbs of Africans, he claimed, were shapely and well-formed, and there was an elegance to be found in their well-apportioned physiques. This is the picture. Oh, that's racist all over the place. That picture is just all kinds of racist. In the aesthetic exercise, alongside his derision of the African face, the artist intoned, "Howbeit, I have seen some amongst them whose whole bodies have been so well built and handsome that I never beheld finer figures, nor can I conceive how they might be bettered, so excellent were their arms and all their limbs." His views on the excellence of the black physique and the disfigurement of the black face were based on the reigning definitions of attractiveness. In other words, rather than reflecting any reality about black people, they reflected what Bourdieu called judgment of tastes. This is an aesthetic value system crafted by elites that places qualities symbolizing refinement and are removed from the vulgar, the common, and the low, atop the aesthetic hierarchy. Within the aesthetic system of the High Renaissance, pointed noses and fine lips were typically associated with a refined facial beauty. At the same time, well-formed, proportionate figures represented the height of bodily beauty. This aesthetic pairing led to the degradation of the African face and the exaltation of the African body. It also contributed to Durer's uncertainty by the time he rendered the lovely Katharina about the precise contours of true beauty. Durer did not simply inherit the value system that placed black people in aesthetic limbo. He had, in fact, been one of the key architects of this system, which, by the time he met Katharina, he himself had come to view as insufficient. Nevertheless, that reassessment came toward the end of his career. As a young man in the 1490s, Durer had made the quest for true beauty his holy grail. He had left his native Germany in the 1490s and settled in Venice, the artistic heart of the Renaissance. It was there that he met the well-known painter and draftsman Jacopo de Barbari. Barbari's exact year and place of birth are unknown, but it is believed that he was born around 1470, making the two artists fairly close in age. They met, therefore, as peers rather than as artist and acolyte, but Barbari's techniques in painting the human form inspired and bedeviled the German artist. As a result, Durer would chase what he considered to be their perfection for the next 2 decades. To Durer, the genius of Barbari's work was that he drew male and female physiques using measurements calibrated to produce perfect human proportions. Durer was in awe. Barbari's approach to beauty had generated images of men and women that were, in Durer's opinion, stunning, and they quickly eclipsed his pre-existing singular ideal of beauty. Bodily beauty, in fact, like facial beauty, had a variety of manifestations. But the running theme, the one thing that must be present, Durer believed, was perfect proportionality. Durer's wide-eyed zeal might have been something of a tip-off for Barbari. The Italian artist, wary that his secret might get out, kept his method closely guarded. He refused to reveal his process to Durer despite their continued contact, and a visit with Durer in his hometown. Rebuffed, Durer set himself to developing his own canon of proportions, beginning in 1512 and continuing for the next decade. Following what was standard procedure during that era, Durer searched for clues to perfect perfect proportions among the ancients. He took to studying the work of the celebrated Roman architect Vitruvius, and from his studies he arrived at the following conclusion. The head of a man is an eighth a part of him. Further, one also finds a square from the feet to the crown of the head. The span of the outstretched arms is equal to the height of the body. Using these calculations, he believed Vitruvius had rendered human perfection. He has brought human limbs together in a perfect proportion in so satisfactory a manner that neither the ancients nor the moderns are able to overthrow it. Durer uses adapted Vitruvian standard to create his ideal of a normal male and female form, as would be described in his 4 books on human proportion. Vitruvian standard the intense attention to detail in the precise calculation of the idealized length and breadth of each body part drew the respect of his contemporaries. Durer, moreover, added something to the equation that Vitruvius had not: variety. After drawing a normal man and woman, he sketched several men and women with necessary and proper proportions, but of different body sizes. Among these sketches were a disproportionate number of images of plump women. It is unclear from the manuscripts why there was a preordinance of fleshy, rounded women among the artist's sketches in 4 books on human proportions. Surviving reports suggest that Durer worked with 200 to 300 live models in the formulation of his canon proportions. Therefore, it could have been simply that more voluptuous women had made themselves available as models. But that reinterpretation belies his dedication to the project of empirically fleshing out the parameters of perfect proportionality and thereby beauty, because he worked on his project for over a decade. A more likely reason was personal predilection for rounded women. Many of the women he drew, including Katharina and his own wife Agnes, were fleshy and curvaceous. Durer anticipated that his canon of proportions would offer new insights that would separate his work from the canon of perspective current in Italy. As it applied to feminine loveliness, this difference was found largely in the means, not the ends. For Durer's mathematical theorizing led him to calculations about perfect proportionality with seeming predilection for plumpness. Again, I underlined alliteration. This writer, Sabrina Strings, really seems to have a thing for alliteration. A similar standard was in fashion in the most important centers of Renaissance Italy. Urbino is a case in point. A thriving center of Italian Renaissance, Urbino was distinct from other centers of Renaissance such as Antwerp and Venice in one critical respect: its involvement in the slave trade was minimal. For this reason, the question of black aesthetics was not a topic that many artists or philosophers considered, and Africans were less commonly represented in art from the region. Urbino was, however, an an important place for the discussion and dissemination of ideas about female beauty. It was also the birthplace of Raphael, one of the most influential painters of the High Renaissance. Raphael devoted less energy than did Dürer to waxing intellectual about method. Nevertheless, as an artist, he remained deeply invested in the craft of representing true beauty. In 1514, Raphael drafted a letter on the topic of his friend Conte Baldassare Castiglione. The letter served as one of the few instances in which the artist delineated in writing his approach to portraying feminine loveliness. In it, Raphael confided to Castiglione that in order to paint one beautiful woman, I'd have to see several beautiful women. The statement was reminiscent of Dürer's claim that God dispersed beauty over the whole world and that an artist needed a diversity of models to comprehend beauty in all its richness. Indeed, the two artists were colleagues. While the German artist was older and already celebrated by the time of Raphael's rise to fame, by 1514 the two were part of something of a mutual admiration society, exchanging prints and praising one another's work. To Raphael, as to Dürer, no one woman could have it all. In order to comprehend and later represent beauty in a woman, he needed to work with as many women as possible who were judged to be attractive by the casual male observer. Sadly, due to what Raphael described as a shortage of both beautiful women and competent male judges. Wow. Shade thrown, Raph. Shade thrown. He explained that instead he usually relied on his own best judgment. I make use of a certain idea which comes to mind. This may have been something of a half-truth. The Renaissance represented a rebirth of ancient Greek and Roman art and philosophy. Italian high society at the time was saturated by a rediscovery of the art and ideas of classical antiquity. Urbino itself was teeming with neoclassicists, many of whom were members of the Florentine Academy, a center for the discussion and dissemination of neoclassical and especially Neoplatonic ideas. The idea that came to Raphael's mind pardon me. The idea that came to Raphael's mind was at least partially inspired by current neoclassical theories about true beauty, which described beauty as requiring symmetry, harmony, and perfect proportionality. His own work extolled in part for its achievements, its enlivening these classical ideals, even if he was perhaps unwilling to articulate the extent to which he was conversant with them. These ideas, symmetry, harmony, and perfect proportionality, I don't actually find beautiful. Especially in the human form. I find them bland. I find them not worth paying attention to. It's this, perfect ideal that I just don't buy into. I do more believe that beauty is in the differences. When I look at someone and they're interesting looking, that has more of an effect on me than average. Or not average, but the average ideal. The average ideal of beauty. That's pretty forgettable to me. Yeah. The friend to whom he divulged his process of depicting female beauty, Castiglione, was by contrast an open and ardent Neoplatonist. Nearly 15 years after Raphael sent him a letter with his mini treatise on beauty, Castiglione's tome, The Book of the Courtier, appeared in print. In it, he fictionalized versions of what he claimed were real conversations to reveal the artistic ideal of feminine loveliness in the court of Urbino. In one conversation, a man by the name of Giuliano de' Medici is urged to explain exactly what qualified as beauty. Giuliano offers the generally well-respected neoclassical view shot through with Christian idioms, stating that there are diverse sorts of beauty. When this definition proves unsatisfying, he becomes more specific. Differing from the likes of Durer, Giuliani betrayed a dedicated preference for a lady who is neither too fat nor too thin. Since women may and ought to take more care for beauty than men, and there are diverse sorts of beauty, this lady ought to have the good sense to discern what those garments that enhance her grace. Thus, if she is a little more stout or thin than the medium, or fair or dark, let her seek help from dress, but as covertly as possible. That's an absolute. I prefer natural beauty. I like a girl without makeup. I am just saying, homie. If your ideas of beauty are so rigid that you have to tell someone, I prefer beauty. I prefer someone without this or that, or to look like they're not wearing makeup or dressing up, or, that I prefer natural beauty is just such a... It's a self-tell, I think. And it's a self-tell about having these very traditionally dominated ideas about beauty. Yeah, it's a self-tell about having that. I mean, I think a person without makeup is beautiful. I think a person with makeup is beautiful. I think a person who knows how to put their makeup on so it looks like they're not wearing makeup is beautiful. I respect that person. respect that person's ability to do that, because I've learned to do that, and it is not actually easy. You know, this sort of brings up a point about why I only wear eye makeup on camera when I'm on stream or on YouTube or whatever. I don't actually do my makeup. I could, and I would be a lot better looking. Like, I could make myself conform to standard beauty standards for men if I just did my makeup. Like, this whole thing would actually be fixed, and people wouldn't notice, because I did learn how to do makeup. But I don't do that because I want to encourage people to accept that we, as creatures, humans, have flaws. That we can't all be pretty without makeup. It's almost impossible for any of us to actually be pretty without makeup. Or at least judged pretty by societal standards. But we can find ourselves beautiful and pretty no matter what we're wearing or how we look. And I find myself beautiful and pretty. I mean, granted, when I look in the mirror, it's a bit of a shock. It's a bit of like, oh God, who? Oh yeah, that's me. But, you know. But this very much strikes my ear like those guys who talk about liking women who don't wear makeup, but then when they do see someone not wearing makeup, they blame them for not being beautiful. It's like, yeah. So that's the sense I get from Giuliano. Giuliano's preference for women he describes as medium, a term that was seemingly self-evident yet maddeningly unspecific, was part of the Italian neoclassicists' understanding of beauty. As with Durer, harmony and proportionality were integral, a point Giuliano underscores when he states, if the form of the whole body is fair and well proportioned, it attracts and allures anyone who looks upon it. Whereas Durer calculated proportionate physiques in a manner that separated the concepts of proportion and size, the Italian humanists of the Florentine Academy had a slightly more exacting standard of female beauty, one derived from the ancients. Their model was a Roman goddess resurrected in the Florentine Academy in the late 15th century. Her name was Venus. Venus was her name? Giuliano did not use the name Venus in the Book of the Courtier. He didn't need to. Giuliano de' Medici carried the family name that was synonymous with the goddess's return to glory. His father was Lorenzo de' Medici, celebrated 15th century Florentine ruler, patron of the arts, and sponsor of the Florentine Academy. Yes, that Medici. In the 1460s, Lorenzo became friends with a young artist to whom his own father, Piero de Cosmio de' Medici, had taken in shortly before his death. The famed Alessandro Botticelli. Okay. Only slight non sequitur. How many of you guys have played the card game Car? You know, vroom vroom, C-A-R, not C-A-R-D, card game, but Car, like riding around, called Botticelli. Botticelli. It's a game of guessing famous people. As a child, it was one of my favorite games to play in the car. But I was terrible at it because I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any famous people. I didn't know anything about any famous people. I was just... Yeah, there was very little outside influence on my world as a child because of where I grew up. But I really liked the game. I do think that as the world has grown larger and more people have earned fame, that game will get harder and harder to play. Because to really play it well, one has to have a very broad range of experience with the media, with popular cultural media. And historic media, and all of these other things. So it's really... yeah. But it was a fun game. And every time I see Botticelli's name, it brings up memories of that game for me. Anyway, little side note. Botticelli's achievements were sundry, but the artist was best known for his images of Venus. Specifically, this one, The Birth of Venus. Pretty classically well-known portrayal of Venus. Images of Venus, the goddess of love. His first Venus, La Primavera, painted around 1482, shows the goddess standing in a mythically dark forest surrounded by enticing globes of fruit. She is flanked by gods and nymphs, dancing joyously and reveling in the love inspired by nature's beauty and bounty. Botticelli's next Venus was his most iconic painting, The Birth of Venus. It depicts the goddess naked atop a shell that is gliding on shore. Zephyrs from the left blow her golden hair as she gathers it in her right hand and uses it to conceal her pelvic area. With her left hand, she half-heartedly attempts to cover her breasts, coyly leaving one available for the viewer's gaze. From the right, her handmaiden approaches to provide her with garments that would be needed to clothe the demure goddess in such a realm. Alright, so the one thing about Botticelli's paintings, and it just hit me, the one thing that doesn't land for me is his landscape perspective. His landscape perspective just doesn't land. It rises too far up in the background. Also, his trees don't feel real. They don't have the same dynamic feeling of realness as his, as the figures. Same with the water. I may or may not feel that way about the water when I look at that in color again. But, and as I remember the other La Primavera, I also remember the trees feeling off. They don't seem quite right. When I was young and learning landscape perspective, it took a lot for me to stop bringing the background of the landscape up too far. It's very much, you very much are drawn to fill the picture, going, the bottom half is land and the top half is sky. But that's not really how it works with a landscape perspective. Unless you are using a perspective that is specifically below your subjects and looking upwards, or very high above your subject and specifically looking downwards. But when you are at the height of your subjects and looking straight forward, while we see the horizon halfway up, we don't actually see the horizon halfway up because of how the land comes back towards us. It can be very difficult perspective to master or to even conceptualize. I have found that photography has been what has helped me get that. Trying to nail down how to take a good landscape photo, has made me very aware of where I want to put the horizon and what the land coming back towards me looks like. And I feel like, Botticelli's expressions of that are not they don't quite fall into that. And it's maybe because he didn't have a camera, so he didn't have that, that framing device to work from. He didn't have to deal with that, thinking in terms of camera frames. But that's just my opinion. Social. Botticelli, who was Lorenzo de' Medici's friend and confidant, was a member of the Florentine Academy. He was thus inspired by the poetic works and philosophical tete-a-tetes to which he was privy. The Birth of Venus is often regarded as the earliest Renaissance painting to reimagine a style known as Venus pudica. in which the modest Venus reaches to cover her pubis and often her breasts. Which is what we see most depictions of Venus in that position. And most sort of high. I do not know why. Well, maybe he's got to go to the bathroom. But other than that, I can't imagine why he wants to go outside today. It is... If it's not freezing out there, it's just above freezing. And and it is very wet and overcast and generally gross. Which is, you know, my kind of weather. But yeah, most that whole pose is a. I mean, yeah. There are words there that are escaping me at the moment. Botticelli would not have been the only Botticelli would not have been the only artist inspired by the Medicis to paint the goddess of love. Raphael knew the Medicis well, having been commissioned more than once to paint portraits of members of the family. He might not have mentioned a neoclassical influence for his portraits of beautiful women in his letters to Castiglione, but he painted several Venuses in his lifetime. One of the most mystifying and controversial was a portrait of a nude woman, her hands modestly covering her private parts, said to be his mistress and muse, Marguerite Luti. The chapter in Giuliano de' Medici mentions the character Giuliano de' Medici mentions none of his exegesis on beauty in the Book of the Courtier. His family history and their eminence in molding Renaissance aesthetic ideals were left unstated. His contemporaries, however, would have been well aware of the family's influence on feminine aesthetic standards. This may have been why Castiglione chose to make Giuliano his mouthpiece on the question of feminine loveliness. Giuliano's stated preference for women who were both medium and proportionate was representative of the Italian canon perspective, as it was embodied by Venus. It is relevant, of course, that this preference was not so rigidly codified that women who were stout or spindly might not be able to make themselves attractive, according to Giuliano, through fashion. If medium women were preferred, fat and thin women were not summarily dismissed. It is equally intriguing that in the same breath in which Giuliano mentions body size, he muses on skin color, suggesting that women who were fair or dark might too improve upon their shortcomings through dress. This nod to those of different skin tones may have contained a subtle reference to Africans, although slavery was not a booming enterprise in Urbino at the time. Africans were not an unknown presence. Giuliano's own blood relation, Alessandro de' Medici, the later Duke of Florence, was also known as Il Muro, or the Moor, since his mother was black. That's interesting. Castiglione's Book of the Courtier is regarded as a seminal text, an etiquette book of sorts. The work reveals the new rules of conduct at the very moment they were being restated and refined by the Italian upper class. Castiglione's characters even assumed an uncomfortable coyness when it comes to plain speaking about les regoles de bellezza, or the rules of beauty. They tread lightly on topics that the lowly commoner might otherwise pursue with abandon. Scarcely a whiff of this high-minded affection is found in Angolo Firenzuela's 1541 report to Castiglione's work, tellingly titled On the Beauty of Women. Firenzuola was born in Florence in 1493. He traveled to Siena, where he studied law, before heading off to Rome to take holy orders in 1518. In Rome, he took vows as a Vallambrosian monk before realizing that the life of the monastic and its attendant celibacy did not really suit him. In 1526, according to contemporary accounts, he was dispensed from his vows. Firenzuola stayed in Rome, where he entered the shimmering circle of literati that included... Hi. Yeah? Are you going somewhere, or are you just standing there? Okay. Cats be cats. Firenzuola stayed in Rome, where he entered the shimmering circle of literati that included the distinguished Pietro Bembo, a Catholic cardinal, aristocrat, and student of the works of Plato, Petrarch, and a Catholic cardinal, aristocrat, and student of the works of Plato and Petrarch. Bembo, then in his 50s, lived in Urbino and was well acquainted with the ruling Medici clan, along with being known for his own neoclassical poetry. Bembo had famously appeared as an interlocutor in the Book of the Courtier, sparring with Giuliano de' Medici on the definition of true beauty. Inspired by present company, Firenzuola decided... That came out weird. Inspired by present company, Firenzuola decided to compose his own discourse on beauty. His treatise, The Book of the Courtier, like The Book of the Courtier, was written in dialogue form. Firenzuola, however, switched the sexual composition of his group, having 4 women converse with one another about what precisely constitutes perfect female beauty. In a Christian neoclassical view that invoked Raphael, he claimed that no one woman had been endowed with all the necessary elements of beauty, but rather that nature had dispersed the good bits here and there. Thus, to animate his vision of the perfect female beauty, Firenzuola crafted a montage of beauty parts taken from 4 female conversants in his treatise. The first element of true beauty was, of course, proportionality, clearly inspired by the Neoplatonists, such as Bembo, with whom he dined. Kelso, the lone male character among the conversants, describes this proportion as mysterious. claims that it is a measure that is not in our books, which we do not know, nor can even imagine. This limitation did not prevent him from trying, for while beauty specifications and precise measurements could not be detailed, their intellectual forebears had left them with a vision of feminine perfection. The ancients consecrated them to the beautiful Venus, in which an important part of Firenzuola's project is enabling his male mouthpiece, Kelso, to sift through the many women he knows, including those present in the dialogues, to identify who has features that approach the exquisite proportions of Venus. In a nod to both the ancients and Castiglione, Firenzuola writes of his well-proportioned Venus as being medium-sized, but still shapely. Firenzuola conveys this through Kelso, who states that the ideal woman is somewhat between lean and fat, plump and juicy, of the right proportions. That this woman should still remain plump and juicy is telling. Evoking others in the Renaissance pantheon, Firenzuola reminds us that even as proportionality is sought, so too is fleshiness. In fact, if one is to drift to one side of the scale, it should be in the direction of voluptuousness, not slimness. Quoting Aristotle, Kelso claims if the good habits of the body are evident in the firmness and thickness of the flesh, the bad habits must then be evident in the flabbiness and thinness. In other words, thickness was a sign of good health, whereas thinness was a signal of poor health and hygiene. In a point-by-point analysis of the figure, Kelso informs the women that cleavage should be plump so that no sign of bones can be seen, and the hips should be wide and pronounced, and the arms should be fleshy and muscular with a certain softness. Be pretty, but not too pretty. Be perfect, but not too perfect. Be muscular, but not too muscular. Be fat, but not too fat. It bothers me. It just bothers me. Though thickness had been deemed superior to thinness, the question nevertheless remained. Was it possible that a woman could be considered too fat to be beautiful? When asked this, Kelso equivocated momentarily before responding that even quite fat women could achieve the heights of beauty. One likes a robust body with nimble, capable limbs, well placed and well proportioned. But I would not want my ideal beauty to be too big or very fat. Yet even though Ilba Soparella is quite fat, she is still a very beautiful young lady who carries herself well. Kelso. This young lady has such a majesty in her body, a beauty in her eyes. It seems her fatness has granted her a beauty that agility. I judge her to be one of the most beautiful women in these parts of town. Again, just fuels you. Let's see how far we've got to before our next good break point, because we are coming up on 2 hours. feel like that fell out from earlier in the book. It's artists, especially Durr, were beginning to lean towards the idea of beauty and diversity, and influenced by the people and bodies they were exposed to, as well as prevailing conversations and ideals of the time. Durr specifically shifted perspective late in his career after Portrait of an African Woman, Katharina, in 1521. Artists, philosophers of the time valued proportionality as a beauty ideal. There was a trend to consider black bodies properly proportional and beautiful, but to view facial features as grotesque. Black people were becoming more visible group because slavery through the 15th and 16th century, fat was preferable. Wow, Trev. That feels like a very high school sort of way of looking at it. I mean, that is basically what this whole first section is. You know, that's what the takeaway on this first section is. It's just there's a lot of background perspective added in this section. I think are going to actually call it in there at the end of that conversation between Salvagia and Kelso. Because it is getting on to 2 hours. And we will start next week with On the Beauty of Women Illustrates the Value. You know, I feel like we have a pretty good idea of what this section is gonna tell us. The rest of what this section is gonna tell us. I don't know if everyone feels it important to run through all of these names that are gonna be thrown at us, because I'm not sure they're gonna be on the test, but you know, it is, it does give you some idea of how ideas around beauty were being disseminated at the time. So we will pick back up with next week and finish the first section. Thank you everyone for being here. Oh, there we go. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you very much, Maddie, for your additions. As always, I really do very much appreciate your perspectives in chat. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Just Me Crystal, for being here. Thank you, all you lurkers. Much love. Stick around for the raid. Now is the time on the show when I say 2 up, 2 down. VA, double deuces. I'm out, y'all. Where's the stream ending? There it is.
Do you think that saying that to the Russians was a violation of any law?
I don't know. It obviously is an encounter that would be of interest to a special prosecutor investigating obstruction of justice. And so I can't answer that from this vantage point. And I know of that only through news accounts, and if the news accounts are accurate, it's frankly shocking. It's shocking that there weren't other Americans in the Oval Office with the Russians and the president. But that's about all the vantage point I have on it.
Take us into the room with you when you're meeting with President Trump. Let's choose the time that he invited you to dinner. You'd hoped others would be there, but you see the table set just for two. It's just the two of you. He starts by complimenting you and then goes into this stream of consciousness monologue. You say he spoke in torrents. Give us a sense of what he was saying.
Well, yeah, that's the dinner from January the 27th, which was a Friday at the end of his first full week as president. And my assistant called and said the president was calling for me. And he called and said, "Do you want to come over for dinner tonight?" And I said, "Certainly, sir. It's up to you." And he said, "How's 6 or 6:30?" And then he fixed on 6:30. And I said, "Certainly, sir." And I went that evening to the White House. I was very concerned after that phone call because it's an extraordinary thing for the President of the United States to socialize alone with the director of the FBI, given the way in which the FBI and our entire country has tried to keep that organization separate from the presidential power and politics since Watergate. So I was very nervous about it. Was reassured, though, when I saw Jim Clapper, the director of national intelligence, later that day, who assured me there must be others at the dinner. So I thought it would be a group dinner, probably with other leaders, or the president just trying to get to know people. I show up at the White House and stand in the doorway to the green room, just chatting with two Navy stewards. And I look into the green room, and the furniture's all been moved off to the sides, and there's a small oval table in the center with just two place settings. And I can see from my vantage point that the one closest to me says Director Comey. So suddenly I know it's a one-on-one, which was very concerning because of the norm that I described. The president arrives, we sit down, and he makes very clear right at the beginning that the purpose of this is for me, in essence, to ask for my job, which was bizarre because he had several times in previous conversations over the prior 3 weeks said he hoped I was going to stay and really looked forward to working with me. None of that was acknowledged, and the conversation begins with him saying, in substance, "So what do you want to do?" Meaning, do you want to stay as FBI director? And then he moved through the salad and then shrimp scampi to asking me for an explicit pledge of loyalty, which was extraordinary and deeply troubling.
Describe how he asked you for the pledge of loyalty.
He looked at me and said, just that, I need loyalty, I expect loyalty. And I just looked at him, and I didn't blink, and I didn't move.